Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Code and Connor podcast. My name is Connor Deek, CEO of CodeStrap, and I'm joined, as always, with the original CodeStrap himself and CTO, Dorian Smiley. We're going to be bringing you guys the latest and greatest around Palantir, the tech, the company, the community. We'll also be discussing insights on other companies, things happening in the world of AI, of consulting, of investing, and any meaningful topic that requires attention. The focus on today's episode is the disruption of AI on consulting and impact of big consulting on AI. We're joined today by James O'Dowd, founder and managing partner of Patrick Morgan, a talent advisory firm focused on the professional services sector, and Usman Sheikh, founder of High Output Ventures, a firm that builds and invests in remote-first companies with a focus on tech-enabled professional services. James and Usman, welcome to Code and Connor.
Good to be here. Good to be here, Connor. Thanks.
Awesome. So to kick off the discussion, guys, we're going to talk about the impact of AI on big consulting. And I'd like to start with new entrants and investments that are being deployed. I'll kick it to you guys to start the conversation, but maybe we start with what we're seeing with PE backs new entrants and PE buying up, private equity buying up existing services companies.
Look, the PE wave into the sector over the last 3 years has been nothing short of phenomenal, right? And I think we've evolved now to a position of where it was relatively nascent to a scenario where pretty much every investor we speak with, if they're not already in the sector, wants to own an asset. And we've also evolved from the kind of classical private equity roll-up play to particularly on topic with what we're talking about here, to real like genuine operational value creation post acquisition. So you have this quite significant breadth of organizations across consulting, accounting, IT services in particular, who previously were probably not well capitalized enough in many instances to, do the kind of roll-ups, invest in the technologies, do the kind of value creation that we're seeing now. And we're now reaching a phase where, one, I guess you have a degree of kind of saturation of these well-capitalized businesses, and two, where you're beginning to see some real disruption, particularly within the startup community, of the operating model. And I think that's kind of the theme of this conversation, right? But that's what we've seen so far.
Yeah. I think what was interesting also is like how lots of the very large venture capital businesses like General Catalyst have raised funds, particularly with this thesis as well, on how to do both invest in the technology and then use the capital that they're raising to also buy out these firms to bring that time to revenue much faster. And because I think like with most services businesses, which are relationship businesses, it takes a while to close those contracts, especially larger ones. And I think like this is a great shortcut to do it. The question remains whether, and I think we'll talk about this, whether the technology and the processes map really well, because it sounds really great in theory, but I think like there's going to be an execution problem, which is coming apparent with even pilots that pretty much everyone is running right now.
Yeah, we read recently that like there's new research coming out from like McKinsey and some of these other firms that people are kind of let down by their AI plays or whatever that they're trying to run. That there's high failure rates, that the technology is relatively unstable, that they're basically failing when they go to production. Yeah,
right.
Now I think there's a lot of nuance there because we see certain cohorts of people succeeding. A lot of that I think has to do with the technology platforms they adopt, and partners that they have, et cetera. But I'd be interested to get your thoughts. Like, would there be a cooling off period in private equity if they experience the same sort of thing? Like if they start to see failures in the thesis around production ready AI, do things reset or do things keep moving? Or like, and also who's winning here? Like, do we know some success stories in the space that are not what McKinsey's seeing and not what these research reports are pointing to?
It's interesting, right? I think the PE interest in the sector has a lot to do with AI, but it extends beyond that. So I don't think they're purely like focusing the success or failure of their portfolio companies on the adoption of AI. Like there's broader reasons for these funds to be buying these organizations. High margin, recurring revenue in accounting, recurring revenue, easy to do these roll-up type strategies. But clearly, like the ones who are able to get ahead on AI adoption are the ones that are going to lead. Like, I think when I look across the market right now, for sure that the challenge is where's the right technology, but particularly in larger firms, it's still about the human element, right? It's about the adoption of a lot of this technology. It's about finding credible leaders, AI leaders, who are able to combine that expertise with industry expertise or domain expertise and deploy that. I don't think there's a lack of awareness or a lack of want in any professional services organization to take up this technology. The degree to which it's being implemented successfully, I think, is quite limited, at least particularly in the larger firms right now. And then to my point earlier, like, you have these really interesting case studies of kind of startups who are effectively taking on capital, trying to build completely from scratch, acquire product businesses effectively to build these services organizations. And they kind of maybe have the opposite challenges. We're running into the typical problems you'd have of building a startup from scratch in its own sense. So you've got the technology, but how do we then scale the people side of it and get the right skills on board? So to answer your question, I think it's something that everyone's going after. The degree to which it's been successfully deployed, I think, is quite mixed. And who are the winners right now in terms of like the legacy professional services organizations, the PE-backed ones? There's no one who's absolutely nailed this yet. There's no one who's running a true, at least from what I can see in the services world, a truly embedded kind of AI, capability. Although I think there are a few who aren't too far away.
You're actually seeing AI leaders, you mentioned that, or highly talented engineers being recruited or brought into these services companies, just because from our experience, that was not the case. And then as you see this PE-backed capital or this private equity capital flow into these companies, are they just buying that company but not having a cohesive strategy where they need to bring in those talented engineers? They're just going to try and buy technology or adopt it with the people they already have?
It's really mixed. It's thousands of these use cases now. I think that the businesses who are doing it well are doing exactly that. Like, it's how do you get towards that future skills mix within your organization where you're balancing that engineering talent with the kind of go-to-market senior expertise that I think aren't going to go away. I think particularly in the larger organizations, the challenges that they're running into is that they're having very mixed adoption and a mixed ability to hire and integrate some of this engineering talent, and some, to your point, aren't even trying at all. Every different firm seems to have a different thesis on this point. Every firm is at a different position. Like, the competition for talent is getting quite fierce. You also then draw into this, like, where does this talent exist as well? Like, a lot of these firms are now looking overseas. There's some really interesting AI product development hubs, engineering talent emerging in nearshore, so parts of Latin America, investment into Mexico, Costa Rica, Brazil. Some fascinating talent in India, like Gurugram. Like, you're seeing significant investment there. We spoke to one PE fund the other day. They said we came to India for cost, but we stayed for quality. And so it's a really interesting question, and one I think we're in the middle of now. One, what does the skills mix of the services organizations of tomorrow need to look like? No one really knows. And two, like, where is that talent? Nearshore, offshore versus sort of automated capability.
Usman, what are you seeing in this regard? Like, in terms of the talent pool, I like this idea of, like, do we know what the skills are? I don't think it's actually a single person. Obviously, I think they can actually have multiple people that have to contribute to this.
Right.
But what are you seeing in terms of, like, talent and what's going on out there?
I think before we get to talent, I think, like, I wonder whether the problem also is force-fitting the technology on the way that work is currently done. And I think that is at the crux of why we were talking about the failed things. And so we're taking this new thing, and then there's the belief that the augmentation, the automation of these processes will gain the efficiencies. And I almost wonder whether there's a complete rethinking of the entire outcome that needs to be delivered, whether that's an audit that needs to be done, or whether there is a optimization of a system that needs to get done. The way that work is structured, with the way that it's priced today, the way that it's delivered today, still remains fairly the same. And I think, like, that's why, from a NewCo perspective, maybe the challenge over there is people who are, like, work backwards from the end goal. Like, if Jensen Huang said, like, listen, most people deliver chips in whatever 2-year cycles. We have like this 1-year cycle window, and with the 97 Riva 128, it was basically we have one chip, work backwards, and they built all this tooling around the output, which I think is really interesting. And so because that brings it back to the talent thing, lots of the LegacyCos have hired senior tech leadership into the highest ranks of these organizations, which are acting like thought leaders. And they're important because they act as magnets for talent as well. At least that is the assumption. But my question remains is that when strong talent enters the pool and then they're met with the friction of the processes and the bureaucracy and frankly a double cost system, which is sales and how that gets delivered and solutionists and hey, and I saw this, like the Wipro book to bill ratio was clearly showing this. There seems to be no lack of booking strength, which is happening, but delivery seems to be catching up with pretty much most of the majors over here. And I wonder whether that's the problem internally to solve for.
There's a couple things to unpack in there. I like this point though around like the incumbents. I think are going to struggle more in this regard because the way they think about problems tend to be aligned with the metrics that matter for them. Right? They're going to look at a set of metrics that the business is optimized for. To your point, they're going to go, okay, what processes can we automate to take cost out of metric A or metric B or metric C? Right? But no one's sitting around going like, well, what is the outcome that we're trying to reach here? Like, right. If you're just stuck sitting there optimizing for a set of metrics because your business is mature and it's well run, often you miss the mark on like what the outcome you could actually enable with the technology is. And maybe that's 10 times better than what your metric is measuring today, but you'll never actually like think that way because the way these companies tend to be run is like hyper focused on metric optimization and the outcome quarter over quarter for whatever it is they want, cash on books, like the net income, the revenue, the growth, et cetera, right?
Yeah.
So, I think the incumbents here are at a like serious disadvantage. Like I love to focus on like healthcare logistics because like to me, healthcare logistics is the perfect example of where AI is super practical. Like what if instead of these rigid rules, we have to encode in like all these different decision trees and databases that are storing all of these rules? You just explain to the AI, like, here are the rules of the system for every provider and every payer and let the AI figure out what to do in a given scenario. And if you could actually build software that way, you're actually leaning into the strengths of the technology to begin with, which is instead of like rigid control flow, we get neural nets. And that's exactly what they did with Tesla and full self-driving was they ripped out the rules engine and replaced it with neural nets and they got a better outcome. Yeah. If you think about that in the context of logistics operations and rules, it's like all of a sudden you start thinking about the problem in a fundamentally different way. And again, I think these incumbents will be too hyper focused on metric line item 1, 2, or 3 to think like this, And so it's interesting to see like, did the startups come in and start, disrupting?
And ultimately it's the incentive structure and the business model, which is driving this, right? Ultimately, if you're selling a bench, if you're selling hours or whatever it is, you are at odds at what you just said, because how do I price for that? I write about outcome pricing a lot and lots of people push back saying like, it's easy to say outcome pricing, but how do you actually do that on a $3 billion sort of like deployment? And Usman, it's far more complicated to do. And I understand that it is, but maybe the solution is because we're at conflict with the business model. Like I want to close the $1 billion deal or a $100 million deal, but I don't want to chunk it down to 5 million and show that because I just got to close 100 mil because I report how many 100 mil clients I've closed every quarter. And I think that is the conflict. And you see bloat and I personally think that's the opportunity here then.
Just because it's hard doesn't mean it's not possible here. So like every single company gets down to a general ledger, trial balance, and then a set of financial statements. And all of the operations of a business, back office, front office, mid office, or operations do things that then result in that outcome. So to say it's hard is one thing, but to say that you can't do it or you're getting all that pushback, Usman, is just the desire not to do it, because it's easier to just say, here's a fixed fee or here's my rates and hours and just promise us we're going to drive an outcome versus
major gravity well though, dude. That's like saying it's theoretically possible to escape the event horizon of a black hole if you can travel at almost the speed of light. But you can't do it like in escaping organizational gravity, you know.
I'm just saying there's already a rubric to get these things into an outcome or a quantified outcome. So to say that we don't have a direct path, like follow it to the journal entry and the financial outcome, and you can actually quantify these things.
Well, getting back to the thing about talent though, and like how would and private equity in particular, right? So like, I think one, we just have to admit these companies have massive gravity to continue operating the way they do today because that's what the business is optimized for, right? And like, so how do you get them to escape that gravity well? I think if you think about what would it look like if I pulled an Elon and I come in and I like partner with a tech company or people who've actually applied this stuff before, specialists in the applied AI space, I pair them with the subject matter experts, not the thought leadership, not necessarily the C-suite. I mean, people actually know how the business is running on a day-to-day basis, right? Like the director who runs things, the director who can sit there and tell you, like in the context of healthcare logistics, no, when you get that denial code and it's this provider, you have to do X, or you get this write-off code and this thing. It's half of the knowledge of how these companies are actually run on the day-to-day isn't written down anywhere. It's like literally sitting in the heads of like the directors and the sort of mid-level management. Like, what about figuring out a strategy whereby you get rid of a lot of that, but you pair up the really good talent, and it's probably a Pareto distribution. 20% of the people are doing 80% of the work. When you pair them up with technical experts who can actually build, and I don't mean thought leadership, I mean people who write code all day, who are hands-on with the tech, who are committing into code bases, who built up the scar tissue. Does that become something that PE could run as a play? Like they have their partner network of the really talented applied AI people, and now you run this play inside of every organization. You go through and you just rip out the old way of working. I hate to say that is looks a lot like, firing a lot of people, but I feel like you're never going to get to a point where you can escape organizational gravity unless you actually change things in a meaningful way.
Yeah, it's as someone described the other day, it's a bit like going through the valley of death at any kind of industry that undergoes a significant technological transformation has to occur. And in the case of some of the businesses we're talking about, it's getting from their current operating model to the one that you're describing. And I don't think there's like a lack of awareness of like what they need to do, but the actual ability to go ahead and do it is just not straightforward. You can't turn a 600,000 person, system integrator overnight in terms of like changing the systems, processes, the metric, all the stuff that you've just described. And so I think that the point here is that you will see change within the industry. It's the ability of the smaller PE-backed type entities to do that quicker. That gives them a significant competitive advantage. And the question becomes like how much damage is done to the incumbents in that time that they are struggling to move at the pace they need to because of the speed of the technological change versus these newer businesses that are trying lots of different things to get there. Like, and the other point is this, right? All of this stuff we're talking about focuses just on the supply side. I think, if you speak to most PEs or most management teams, they're quite clear, even though they can't make the change, but where the opportunities for embedding agentic AI, Gen AI automation through organization is. I think the piece that is really unclear, and I had this from I hope they won't mind me saying, quite a large PE fund investor in the sector, is that they're really now uncomfortable, particularly in consulting, in knowing what is the future demand side, what are clients going to be coming to consulting firms for in 3 to 5 years. Like that, I think, is the bigger question. Is one, okay, how quickly do we shift the business model? But like, given we can make cost savings through this, what are we actually building towards? Like, what are clients going to be coming to these organizations for in 3 to 5 years' time? Because I think there's now a consensus. It's very much not what they're coming for today, but no one really has the answers to that question.
They're not coming for deck swapping where you just swap the logos on a strategy deck. It's like, and in fact, like we were laughing the other day because you could actually quickly, there's companies that have like millions, $10-million investments in these strategy decks, and you can just ingest them all now and just chat with them and ask questions about them and build strategy off of the existing decks and augment them with research. And you can do that with AI all day. And you're probably going to get as good or a better answer because a lot of these things were very shallow in nature anyway, And so it's like, and I've heard this joke a lot. There's two kinds of consulting. There's the logo swap on the decks and kind of consultant. Then there's the people who really get down into the strategy and nitty gritty and are like customizing things to the customer and delivering something of value. I'd be interested to get your thoughts, Usman, on like, on these types of consulting that take place, like there are definitely these like really repetitive things that seem to happen over and over, and it's just rinse and repeat. And then there are probably things that are adding value. Like, what do you think in the consulting space that you see emerge as things people want to pay for, a year from now, 2 years from now?
I think the role of the consultant remains, like we're talking about, it just changes in certain regards, because I think like as the business model will change, as you're going to need third party counsel. Lots of people are not going to embed this sort of like deeper bench in their firms. Like if you're a large oil and gas player, I don't know whether you build that. And I've spoken to lots of CTOs at these firms who are very frustrated with it, but they still sort of like go back to the consultants to try to figure out, here's the problem. I need to track my methane emissions and I need to get it compliant over here. How do I sort of like get it done? So I think that type of work will still come. I think like the delivery model and what you leave behind is what I believe is the real interesting part to do, which is like, how do you deliver the service? How do you price the service? And what do you leave behind if it's not a deck? And I wrote about this and I got lots of interesting sort of like people talking about it. It comes back to outcomes as well. But I think like, leaving these systems behind, what do they mean? How do you sort of like, because you guys talk, and with Palantir, you talk a lot about ontologies, mapping the data, sort of like getting that sort of like set up so that you enable capability on client side. And I think like that's what happens. If the consultants of tomorrow sort of like get closer to the P&L and can create impact on the P&L, like why will I not call someone in and say like, hey, you guys are pretty good at this. Take a look at this and figure out like whether this can be better. So I think that remains, because I don't see companies getting full stack on everything to get this done. Because first of all, why will a super smart person go to that place where, they're going to work on one boring problem for 2 years? And how long is that going to last? Like, you got to look at the type of talent that you're looking for, and you got to figure out like, what is the environment that retains that talent? And I definitely don't think it's boring legacy.
There's a massive shortage of talent. Like, and like really the talent you need to come in and solve these problems on the technical side is like Palantir grade, OpenAI grade. Like, you can't have people that got like their AI degree on a 6-week course and have never committed a line of code. So on the technical side, and there aren't many of those people, right? So like it's, in a lot of ways, it's almost like you need categorical solutions built by these people. So like AI systems that solve a vertical or solve a problem within an industry, right? And those become a launch pad on which you can build other solutions. So like the really hard parts, the undifferentiated heavy lifting, are figured out. And maybe the solution's 80% there and you've got to tune it to 20% of your organization. And that's a solvable problem. But like doing this at every company and amortizing the cost over a customer base of one is just a recipe for failure, right? So like let's just imagine I'm going to reinvent, claims denials in a healthcare logistics company. Well, why the F should every, company in that space attempt to solve that problem? At probably a 95% failure rate and absorb all the costs and have no way to recoup the costs. Right? That screams like, oh, there must be a professional software company, professional company here, whether that's OpenAI or Palantir or Anthropic, that's going to come out with this domain specific set of solutions or AI systems that are the agentic workforces. And then the real problem is just how do you integrate them into that's how SaaS works today, right? Like plenty of people make point solutions and solve problems for companies. They're not doing that over and over. Some companies are, but like very few. Right. Most of them are integrating, things that other people have built as part of a strategy or whatever. So maybe we see some of the traditional strategy consulting and management consulting and SI work pivot once the technical parts are figured out by the major players. Like OpenAI is busy cannibalizing consumer use cases right now, but I think they're rapidly growing their enterprise consulting business. Palantir, we all know, is huge in this space. Like, it would be interesting to see, like, man, platforms just start to come out that are the agentic workforces. We believe in that. Like, that's what we're doing. We're building pre-trained agentic workforces. So then the equation starts to shift. And to your point about what do you leave behind? At the end of the day, you want a workforce. Like, if I'm a strategy consultant, that's my business. Like, and I think everyone should be thinking about this. Like, well, why shouldn't there be an AI version of that workforce that customers can use? And how does that shift the dynamics? And like, what is it that's left behind? Maybe it's something you can employ in your company to go through all of the data feeds and figure it out from a strategy point of view. Like if we have an ontology, for example, that connects all of your financial data, all of your same store sales, everything across your business, that can then be used for signaling and like signal enrichment to inform an AI system about like what parts of the strategy decks that are sitting in this bank of strategies these companies have done over the past 20 years would be applicable to this set of problems, and then make a proposal and then go research and then update it with current information and facts and then send it back into an inbox that's like, here are all the proposals for this, that, and the other. And like, then maybe you engage with humans to figure out who any of these.
The one assumption that we're making in this, however, is that on both sides, client and consultant side, incentives are aligned in a certain way, which they're not. Like if I leave that person behind, then what is my recurring billing looking like? What is my bonus going to look like? How is billing going to ramp? And then on the client side, is that going to, this might, like I was talking to someone and they were like, we saved this very large government organization like $3 million in their deployments per month sort of like thing. It was like some crazy number. And they did it in a pretty short period of time with an outcome-based price model. But it sort of like made the CEO very uncomfortable along with the CTO that we had to get someone from the outside, inside to find this thing, which was costing us a whole lot of money. And I think this is where ego insurance comes in. This is where cover your thing comes in. Like, there are lots of things. And so incentive structures within organizations need to change. I'd love to get Jay's point of view on even compensation banding, because compensation banding is relatively rigid in these organizations right now with level-based structures. But we're seeing a complete deviation from this in tech, where it's gone absolutely bonkers in tech. But I'm just saying, like, it has to trickle down somewhere over here. A single partner which has optimized his pyramid with agentics is at the same level of the partner drawing the same amount as someone who hasn't. How is that partner going to be retained?
And I think there's a strong awareness of this. Like a big part of the kind of PE flip post buying a legacy partnership is shifting the compensation incentive structure quite significantly. So there's two points here. It's one, how do they do that? Which fundamentally is a far more meritocratic variable based component, a much lower base salary than you'd get at, say, a big four, $300,000 base. Then a pretty significant upside based on revenue generation. And then obviously you have the sweet equity, which is related to the company growth. The really interesting point here though is also like, and you've mentioned it once or twice here, Usman, how does like pricing change? Because the reality is, you can no longer bill for time and materials when that has really shrunk quite significantly and changed the, and sort of achieve the same margin and amount of value. So I think what we're beginning to see, and I think this is what you guys are getting at, is, partners beginning to sell, products and solutions into these organizations that do exactly that. And therefore the pricing model is shifting quite quickly to much shorter, higher volume engagements. Have differing margin, typically expand the margin, but are built on a different ratio. And then the other challenge within this that a lot of the clients that we're speaking with are reporting is the sort of willingness of the client to adopt to that. It's one thing for us to say, you need to pay the same amount, it needs to be on value. But many times I think in the present market, when this is being offered to clients, a lot of our consulting friends are being told that it's being denied and they're not quite comfortable with it. So there's a really interesting moment going on right now about what is value and how is that shifting and what is that actually worth. And I don't think there's kind of a set answer on that just now, but a lot of firms are trying to work through it. But the compensation and the way people are paid, I think the concept of profit sharing and being paid based on the amount of points you have is just a dead idea. I think that's going to go very quickly. And if you continue to do that, you're going to lose in particular the best young talent you have within the organization. And so I think it's something that the larger firms need to wake up to quite quickly.
I think we saw quite a bit there's been a flight out of a lot of the bigger firms. And I personally witnessed this, right? Like I've seen everything run the gamut, like junior talent to senior partners who've been there forever. go to launch their own AI driven version of these sort of managed services and other traditional parts of consulting. And so that is happening 100%. And I don't know, like watching these organizations, Connor, you can speak to this, like how it's like moving the Titanic when you're talking about these huge institutions that have been around forever. And even if they're not like the biggest consultancies, it's still, to your point, Usman, the incentives are so misaligned to try and move on this moment. You will spend the next 10 years fighting over, the compensation packages or how you're going to, achieve the realignment. But Connor, maybe you talk a little bit about two things. One, how hard is it in these massive institutions to create the kind of change we're talking about? And two, is that the ultimate advantage for the boutiques? Because like you can maybe talk a little bit about the strategy as a service offering we're looking at building, and like how easy it is for us to go build that, and then how disruptive that would be to the companies who built all of that IP. And it's like, we don't even need to create the IP. Like we don't need to go out and get that IP. It's all sitting in the four walls of these organizations. So like, is it possible that these AI boutiques come in and just start smashing away at these problems and like actually just disrupt the consultants while they're still figuring out their comp packages?
Yeah. So, I mean, obviously I can speak to big consulting. The incentivization model is such that you're optimizing for that year's revenue. And there is no incentivization. I mean, zero for innovating anything or adopting any type of innovative solution. There's some top-down messaging. There might be a top hire that's supposed to galvanize people to actually change. But right now, there is no change in the incentivization. So what you're doing is you're seeing a bunch of people that are looking outside the window, seeing all this innovation and cool things happening, and people making a lot more money when they work for a company that is doing something profound. And they're saying, why would I stay here where we don't get incentivized? We aren't given really the right tools to do anything. And then I'm constantly being forced to do it the old way when they know kind of the old way is dead. So like, if you don't change this incentivization model, and you don't have some type of criteria that says if you innovate something, even if the payback period isn't in that given year, that you're not going to get any type of compensation for it, then everyone is going to leave. Now, if we're talking about smaller companies that are not like boutiques or startups, but maybe are a few thousand people, maybe there's the ability. And then James, like you said, they're changing how that compensation structure works. There's something there. But again, I'd go back to like, do you even have the talent or the right strategy on like partnering with the technology company to do these things? Or are you backing companies that are just trying to maybe automate some stuff that's not going to drive any change? To Dorian's point around strategy as software, taking all of these PowerPoint decks and all these reports and then putting them into a vehicle that essentially can recreate strategic outcomes that are the replacement of strategy consulting, to be fair, is really easy. And so like, why would, obviously, Usman, you've talked about like companies like to have that third party. They like for someone to blame. But like, if you so cripple how much that costs to get, is anyone really going to choose something that previously cost $1 million that now costs maybe $15,000 to get? I think
super easy. It's not super easy, but like the inspiration for this, have you guys heard of AlphaEvolve from Google?
No.
Basically, AlphaEvolve is the first sort of indication that we might be able to get AI that can also kind of self-learn or self-improve. But like, essentially, it looked at existing solutions to problems and figured out that these were written by humans or curated by humans, like think matrix multiplication, something that could prove. It would look at these existing solutions and figure out, how could I innovate on this existing solution? They built a whole reasoning engine around this and like retrieval system. And they did find a way to do, like, I think it was matrix multiplication a little bit faster. But the idea here is like, if you have an existing set of knowledge and you build the right, engineering around the model to do information retrieval and then reason about like the things it can do given a particular problem set, can it find a better solution using the existing stuff and just improving it a little bit, right?
Right.
Well, if you've got 10 years of strategy decks laying around, and then you can actually improve that with good research tools, right? So like go mine research from, like I use Google Search API, which allows me to do things like limit searches to particular websites, particular date ranges, particular keywords, and ground the model in really high quality information. Now you can go and like have a system that's kind of innovating on top of those strategy decks in response to your organization's behaviors and what's going on in real time, along with the world's knowledge base, which is the internet, which is what a lot of these people are using to begin with. to write the strategy down. So it's like,
right.
It's interesting to see, can we create an AlphaEvolve strategy?
LegacyCo partners would counter this argument by saying that humans are on the other side buying it. They're not looking for software to solve their problems. They're looking for someone to sit down with them who understands them, their business, their situation, who can speak to the board and deliver that confidence to them and say, this is the right way how to do it. Like Connor brought up plausible deniability, which is one, but I think like they just need that. And I think like that's going to be the counter. They'll counter by saying like, cool, we'll use AlphaEvolve too, and we'll come up with the same 4 strategies, but our guy or girl is going to go over there and deliver that. And that's something that, it's going to be very difficult. And to a certain extent, that's why I think it's tech-enabled services. I don't think that you ever take the people side out of it. When I talk to a lot of these YC startups, which are going directly at these firms, but have never sold into them, have never done advisory work, who've never done that board, very, delicate handling, 3 versus 2. How do I spin this one onto my side? That is a art in itself. And I think like, that's why the PE angle interests me quite a bit. Like, how do you sort of like remove the legacy infrastructure from these firms, free them, get their compensation right? And I think that is their bet right now. Will the best rainmakers sort of like leave? Like, that's, James can probably answer that. But
yeah, it's the biggest risk those firms face, right? As you're making this transformation. And I think when you look at some of the larger buyouts in the sector, without naming names, the sort of plus 5,000 people, professional services organizations, they obviously have been the most difficult to shift. And I think the PEs who have been too aggressive in driving some of this change, maybe haven't understood the dynamics of the organization, tend to be the ones who are less successful. So you've got this constant balance of how do we drive this transformation that we believe is going to equate to a commercial gain versus not upsetting the sort of the old horses within the organization, because we know that's going to lose revenue because our senior rainmakers are going to leave the business. So it is a real fine balance. I think what we're beginning to see, like the more experienced investors in the space are being a lot more diligent pre-acquisition about really understanding the sentiment within the organization, the culture within the organization, their track record of bringing partners in, their track record of doing inorganic growth, i.e. M&A, and successfully embedded those organizations beyond just thinking of these businesses, as a set of ratios, financial metrics, and opportunities to do stuff. And I think that's what is quite unique about the sector. People are an asset on the balance sheet, not just a cost, and therefore how they think and feel and how you therefore drive a lot of this change through that is quite important, particularly when you're dealing with senior individuals who really own those relationships. And then, another trend, that the sort of next wave of professional services into the legal sector, it seems right now, I think, particularly when you look at that, and if the assumption is that private equity is going to make big inroads into that sector, you've got a real sort of cultural challenge potentially. You have a sector where the clients are really going to the individual, not the organization, and therefore driving a lot of this change has to be done really diligently if it's to be successful. But I think the idea of just pushing this technology, this thing we keep coming back to, onto an organization isn't that straightforward, and it really requires a lot of consensus to be successful.
Yeah. So touching back on one of your points, Usman, I think you're right that it's not holistically only software or only the old way of doing things. It's definitely a hybrid, but most of these consulting shops are like whatever, the partners and MDs, and then there's a 10 to 20 to 1 ratio of the staff beneath them. If you can do all the work at the lower levels, because the people you really want in the room, right, are the rainmakers, the people that can speak to the board, the people that can defend the position that then supports the buyer or the sponsor of the work. And that's very few people that you actually work with inside the consultancy. So like, can you just take that thin layer of highly experienced domain experts with AI capability or services as software? And that's the model where you then don't have this massive base of staff that are ultimately.
It's enablement, right? Like maybe that rainmaker is paired with the right technology partner to then leverage the stuff in a way that makes sense. But I think this model of I'm going to go get a consultant to speak to my board, or I'm going to go get a consultant so I don't get blamed. Those are the people who are first going to fall by the wayside after, the carnage takes place and AI really starts disrupting things, because those are weak individuals. What the fuck are they doing running a company? Like, I want the person that's at the consultancy sitting in there, because guess what's going to happen when AI starts disrupting these things? You need far fewer people. You just need the top talent, and you can actually do 100 times more with 10 times less people. So the argument would be that I'll compete on margin, and anyone who's out there paying consultants to talk to their board and can't do it themselves, or can't, think strategically about how to apply this technology to the business, they're going to be working for a company that charges 4 times more than I do. And guess what? They're going to be in 3 years out of business,
Right.
So I happen to think that is the fact that companies can get away with that and outsource their leadership mission to a bunch of consultants is wrong. On a fundamental level, that's wrong. You should be able to run your company,
Right.
So anyway, my 2 cents on.
Well, yeah, I think there's lots. Today I wrote about something that I just called the switch. You're right. There are very few people at the company that do this sort of work. And so this rotation of headcount to compute is happening. And let's not deny it. Graduate hiring is down. Hiring generally is down. Attrition numbers are going up and they're not getting replaced. So let's just call a spade a spade. It's happening at the lower levels, and there is rotation happening at that level. So, but I think this whole move for companies to do this is really delicate. I've had these conversations with some of these LegacyCos where they're talking through this, how do they off ramp, significant parts of their organization, and it's the human cost, the other aspects are the difficult thing. So is it going to take strong leadership? Is the market going to force their hand? I actually think the market is going to force their hand over here. Yeah. I personally think it would be very difficult with the incentive structure and ownership structure within these firms to say that I am going to let go of 20% of my workforce. I think no one's going to take that on, because why should I take it on? It's not I'm saving it, but my partnership ends at this time. Why am I being this hero right now? But of course, if the public markets force the larger SI companies and consulting companies into this, then it's just going to be follow the leader over here. And I wrote a piece big consulting is stuck in a high stakes game of chicken, because I think they're all just waiting for one of these pillars to fall. When one pillar falls, it is, listen, this other company did it, so we have to do it to protect our business and our partnership. And then everything starts to fall into line. At least that's my view on how
an inorganic growth strategy, either in the public markets or in the private markets, where private equity could somehow position a company that could do this, you have a technology company like Palantir, for example. Palantir is amazing at going in and solving the world's hardest problems. One of their biggest obstacles they face with growth and getting their products in place is the risk managers on the other side of the table who are more obsessed with managing the risk profile of the company than, advancing technology, or solving a business problem. And you get into these, there's incentive misalignment, a lot of things we've talked about already that are the root causes of those things. If private equity partners with Palantir and adopts an inorganic growth strategy of we're going to go roll up all these companies, maybe they're mid-market companies, and we're going to turn into one large cap company, and we're going to smash Incumbents, because at that point you are removing all the barriers. You've got a technology partner that actually knows what the hell they're doing, a workforce that has solved some of the world's hardest problems at innumerable institutions, right? You could actually go in and apply technology in a way in which it's totally inorganic. They're not buying the tech from you. You're running a play by which you're rolling up a bunch of maybe inefficient companies, or you're rolling up a bunch of companies that may not be competitive in this space, but together with this technology partner, you could actually go and smash Incumbents. So, is that a play that could actually play out in the future?
James, are you seeing any of that? where the private equities are buying the services companies, but they're coming with maybe a technology partner?
Increasingly so, yes. I mean, there's always been this question of like, would big tech at some point themselves acquire, or indeed one of the technology companies acquire an established platform, as opposed to that being a PE roll up. I think it can be quite challenging. Like, it sounds great on paper, but to roll up a load of organizations and to bring them together that easily, there's an integration challenge. So I do sort of feel like it is being thought through. It is being attempted. There are a couple of like big names that are consistently coming out and trying to do this. Have I seen it successfully embedded as yet? Not so much. Although there may be some examples, Usman, you've spotted.
I mean, OpenAI, Anthropic, others are creating the same model that Palantir has. So forward deployed engineering, that is services, that is embedded strategy with immediate implementation of the solution.
And Palantir is solving the integration problem today, just in an organic way. They're actually working with private equity and contracting with them to do this integration across all these systems of record. Imagine your PE firm, you got 15, ERP systems of record across all of your port codes, and you want to roll that up and you want to gain some intelligence and insight across your entire portfolio as a result of that. Palantir is solving that. Like, Boundary by itself is like a massive leap forward in system integration problems and like integrating workflows and businesses together under a single platform. Like, to give you an example, Skywise for Airbus, that integrates all the data from all of the airlines that buy products from Airbus, buy their planes from Airbus. Imagine how hard of a problem that was, So like, integrate all that and to do it in such a way in which every organization felt safe with their data being in a single platform, because they don't want their competitors seeing their data, So like,
right.
Palantir is very unique in its ability to do this integration work. I see them as uniquely positioned because they've done the 20 years of FDE work, so they understand business problems and how to solve them. They have the premier platform for doing SI work, and they have some of the world's experts in applied AI, and are actually like, they can demonstrate value being created for customers. It's not vaporware. It would be interesting to see like Palantir. They are close with private equity. They got a long way to go, but I mean, it'd be interesting to see what happens there if they became a partner that was like adopting this strategy.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing that I see with the roll-ups and taking down the incumbents is ego insurance is a thing, and relationships are strong, and incentive structures are aligned with maintaining the status quo during the people who are going to make those calls, whether they have 5 years left on the partnership or 3 or 7, like, ultimately you're going to have to look after yourself. And I think like that is the biggest impediment that I think that they will face with the strategy. So then this comes back to the technology angle, which is, can you be 10x better? And if you're 10x better, then you are at a disadvantage buying from LegacyCo, because you have to buy this NewCo sort of like solution because your business depends on it. But I think those breakthroughs are rare, and LegacyCo is betting on the fact that it's not going to happen. And they're very sure that they have adapted through multiple cycles before, and their position remains that this is another cycle which we will navigate, and we're pretty smart and we're going to get it through. So that's their position.
I mean, that all points to market forces being the thing that forces change, and ultimately It comes down to competing on margin, right? So like, I need to find a way to create companies that can offer a better service at a cheaper cost. A much cheaper. It can't just be like 10% cheaper. I want it to be like 50% cheaper, 60% cheaper. And that is the kind of disruption you see with technology typically. And it's not, the classic innovator's dilemma isn't one because the tech is cool, it's because the business model is. That's what you compete on with disruptive innovation. You're competing on the business model. And so like, I think especially when it comes to services, we're talking about, a human-centric thing where the cost is the labor. If I can come out with a virtual workforce that can work at 1/100th the cost and do things 2 to 3 times better, there's no world in which the old model survives. It's dead. It just takes a while, right? Like you have the market will eventually win. It's just like, you're going to be fighting about it. I think, if you haven't read Clayton Christensen's Innovator's Dilemma, that's a really good one to read and like kind of look at how the macro mills were disrupted by the micro steel mills, and like how they just competed on as with a better business model at the end of the day. That's what applied AI is really going to be. You know,
Right.
like it's not. We think of it as automation, but it's really like, to me, it's like, how can I build a company from the ground up that embraces this technology, and could it fundamentally operate in a better way? You know.
Yeah.
That
And that's new.
That you know, that's new.
Yeah.
So.
And that's what I think NewCo is, like lean, modularized, outcome oriented, sort of like closer to the P&L, direct impact. And most importantly, the way that it's structured is fundamentally different, like you just said. Like you can't expect to go that 50 or 100% different if you're going to structure the same way. And I continue to see this whereby the play today is augmentation is going to get us out of this. And I wrote like, reskilling is not going to save your business. Like the model is under threat, and incentive structures are such that, you know, there's going to be a defense. Like someone messaged me today and he just said, like, I think you're underestimating the difficulty NewCo will face in disrupting this and the base. And LegacyCo will see these solutions first and potentially try to buy them out as well. So that's the position.
Well, that integration of, like, let's say it's a small boutique company that's tech first or tech forward, when they do get bought, from experience, and they come into a large institution, it's a steaming failure because they completely misalign on culture. They hold next to no power inside of a large machine or large company. And over time, most of those acquisitions, particularly of services companies, don't work out. Now, James, you might have a different view because you see this more and more, but I personally have never seen it be successful.
Never. It's very uncommon. I mean, the typical model is exactly that, right? They acquire the business, they take out, unfortunately, a lot of the innovation on what made that business special, merge it into the organization. And quite quickly, the talent leaves, and you do see that happen pretty readily, pretty regularly. And it's also like, what was the point of that acquisition? What was left behind if the people have left? Is there meaningful IP? I think the businesses that kind of doing it's a middle ground, isn't it? Is it kind of LegacyCo? Is it the complete startup community? I think the ones that are really winning are sort of the ones in the middle, right? The platforms with good PE investment who have a clear proposition and go to market and have the ability to make these changes more quickly and readily. Whilst a lot of the disruption is happening in the startup community, they're doing it from like a fresh space. They're having to build the whole organization, get the talent in. They haven't got the track record that, you know, the repetitions to talk about. They haven't necessarily got the right talents mix. But I think it's that blend of really high quality senior individuals with domain expertise coupled with the right technical talent, the right tools, who are going to win in this market eventually. I mean, no one really knows. And maybe one of these larger firms is able to evolve a lot quicker than we anticipate. But no, I agree. I think there's a real challenge. To that point, I think doing M&A as a more of a mid-sized organization does enable you to have more success in integrating those unique businesses. So I mean, there's no hard and fast rule. I'm sure there are some success cases of large organizations doing it, but I do agree with you, Connor. It's few and far between.
So you do a report where you kind of call out the major movers around the different consultancies or the big firms. Can you talk a bit about that? Is any of that for positioning for maybe a technology-led approach? Are any of those you see being hyper successful moves, or is it all just kind of like rotating deck chairs on the Titanic?
I think it is. Look, I wrote recently, and it is true. I think about 60% of like senior partner moves end up being successful, as in they then stay in the new organization. And I think a lot of that comes down to how systemized and well ingrained some of the large organizations are within their clients, and actually how little impact the partners have versus maybe what they think they do. The operating model of a smaller, or the go-to-market model of a smaller organization is very different, obviously, to a larger one. And therefore, I think that whilst in principle, the idea of going to a mid-sized technology-backed organization, technology-enabled organization sounds great on paper. The ability to migrate those client relationships and be successful on that new platform is somewhat slightly more difficult. But clearly the direction of travel is one way, right? Like you are seeing top talent leaving larger firms to go and, go into one of these PE-backed entities. I think the challenge is now there's so many of them, you're almost sort of trying to guess which one is going to be the most successful. They all do look quite similar. And how can the market continue to sustain this amount of private capital coming in and these smaller shops being bought up and telling a similar story? So, it's really hard to pick a winner. Clearly, there's a lot of activity in terms of the senior talent market. To Usman's point, there's a lot of attrition in these larger organizations. A lot of that is forced attrition, unfortunately. There's a massive slowdown of junior hiring. The model is shifting quite quickly. A lot of activity in terms of key people moves, that's for sure.
Do you think there's any change in recruiting around this though? Like, would you see a movement where you were like, you need to create a pair of positions? You know, it's like, well, normally you would bring in this hire to solve this problem. Today, if you want to think about this, you actually need to pair this person with this technical expert to go out and solve this set of challenges. Like, do you see any changes in the roles adapting to this space? Or like, and I've heard things about like, AI manager roles and stuff like that. I'm not really a believer in that. But I do think at the senior level, like you almost need to start augmenting this with this other type of talent that can come in and advise them and enable them more, like actually build a solution to the problem.
Yeah, it's a challenge. I think the whole way that like these services are being sold is going to shift quite significantly. And the degree to which that's being done successfully, or those conversations in an advanced way that you're describing how actually happen, I think is a little bit limited. I think a lot of people are getting their head around, like, going to the point earlier, what does the future demand side look like? Like, we certainly haven't had that direct, how are we, pairing, senior individual with this domain expertise, with this technical individual. I don't think the market is there yet, at least the client, some businesses that we speak with. But I think that's the direction it's heading in.
There's strategic hires that are sort of leading indicators of this, I think. Like Matt Wood recently left AWS, went to PwC. Matt's famous in the AI community. He was at Amazon forever. This guy's like a legend in our space. I was surprised that PwC was able to recruit him. I think that was a testament to the recruiting effort that took place. But like, you're starting to see this where like they're looking at these strategic technology sort of people. How do we get them to come over to this organization and reshape the way we think about these problems? It'd be interesting to see if that evolves at the lower levels, where it is like thinking about like this VP paired with this, senior technologist kind of thing.
I think you're seeing both. You're seeing these big name marquee hires like really bring credibility to some of these. Fantastic example you named there. But I think the majority of the hiring needs to happen within the sort of individual P&Ls within these organizations. I think you can have a really big name, marquee hire on the board, but to really drive change within the business and get the depth, you need to have, to your point, AI experts with some sort of industry or functional expertise. And you're starting to see this across the market. It's how do we plant these, AI experts with a domain expertise into different bits of our organization. I think trying to go to client side with someone who is just a technical mindset or has general AI understanding just doesn't cut the mustard. It really does need to be depth in terms of expertise. So, I agree with you. I think that we spoke about it as well. There is a bit of talent shortage in terms of that kind of profile. There are very few individuals, because this technology is so nascent, who can credibly talk about having depth in agentic AI, generative AI with, 5, 10, 15 use cases of where they've driven that kind of transformation. So I think that is where we'll end up. I just don't think there are that many individuals who can talk credibly about that just now.
We've got a number of years to go before you're cranking out people with the number of reps required, I think. So,
yeah.
We're probably 2 to 3 years out.
Dorian, given that you're pretty close to the Palantir ecosystem and this FDE role seems to be all the rage, LegacyCo will say that we embed engineers client side as well and blah, blah, blah. But how do you see the role?
They don't. I never see that. Like, let me give you the parallel in a technology company. What a technology company does, they create product teams. Product teams are made up of business leaders and engineers, and they're usually small teams, like probably anywhere from 5 to 8 people. And they'll build a product that hundreds of millions of people use end to end, from literally like the napkin designs to deployed production system running on your phone, whatever, and the whole back end goes. like 5 to 8 people can build that in a lot of cases. And these larger institutions, they don't do that. They have centrally managed IT orgs that keep engineers on their books, and they'll loan them out to you for a period of time. And then they'll also take them away and like put them on other things. So it's like the effectiveness of the model doesn't work if they're not, the engineer has to be fully vested in the outcome, and their incentives have to be 100% aligned. Like in a product team in an organization, your success as an engineer and individual is tied to the success of that product. If it does well, you get more funding, you get a raise, you get a bonus, you get all kinds of things, right? But like if the product doesn't do well, you're on to the next thing. You're probably, that team will be disbanded. You'll figure out another product to go build with someone else. So like that's the model we need, is tech enabled, like business led, tech enabled. And none of these institutions I see do that at all. And that's what the FDE model really is.
There's pushback that, the Palantir FDEs are these rare unicorn type people who can talk the business talk and build the solution at the same time. There's not enough supply for them. And perhaps you agree with that, or do you think like there is a supply
I disagree with that. They don't all build. It's like there's a wide range of FDEs. Most today, I would say, are not code forward. Like they're it's not that they're non-coding entities, but like they're not like software engineers. They're not true software engineers, in my opinion. Like I think most of them can do some coding, but they are brilliant in terms of the way they think about problems, and they're very heretical in the way they think. They match Palantir's culture very well, and I think it enables them to go sit with senior leadership and get respect immediately because they are obviously super intelligent, and they know how to think about the foundry shaped way to solve the business problem. And the foundry shaped way is like the way that gets to value and cuts through all the bullshit, right? So like you might be shaping a problem in an initial strategy meeting with an FDE, and it's being driven by, some 2 to 3 year roadmap discussion about, we need to build a data lake, and the Palantir FDE like, why do you need the data lake? You know what I mean? Like, why do you need 3 years? You have this data asset. Let's go clean it up and get it into production so the business can start extracting value. Like people are so lost in a lot of times in the way they're shaping their problems for their organizations around 2 to 3 year roadmap discussions that they often miss the thing which is important, which is go deliver a unit of business value. Why aren't we doing that? So FDEs are very well trained in like getting to business value quickly and cutting through the bullshit of the roadmap and strategy and thought leadership around a problem. But I would say they're not like the best engineers necessarily. There are some that are like that, but not all.
If you compare that to how big consulting work, it's none of those things. So like they might get brought in there to do something very specific, not question anything, maybe get some of the engineering done. And if you don't have that culture, that ethos to go solve something profound, get to a unit of outcome, then you don't deliver that way. And so it is not just hyper differentiated, but you're driving a lot more outcomes with that model versus how big consulting.
If FDEs are empowered to build the software the organization ought to have wanted,
Right.
And I think that's a fundamental difference. Is like, how many institutions do you walk in where you empower a team of people to build the software the institution should want? Like that gets you fired at most places. So start talking like that.
So is the assumption that the FDE, there are a couple of things. So Connor touched on it, that there is a business model mismatch over here because the 2 to 3 year engagement is direct billing that I'm going to put on my books and say, here's what I put. So let's set that aside. Let's say that, LegacyCo hires an FDE and sort of like maybe empowers them. Like, do you need a Palantir type platform for a FDE to be effective, or do you think that they can operate without
100%, because the way the Foundry as a platform was created is like, you have a set of tools as an FDE inside Foundry to build your solution, to shape the problem to the tool set and deliver the value quickly, right? If there's a gap in that, one of the things that happens is like, you'll go back to the product team and explain the gap in the solution. The product team actually builds the platform, right? So like product teams at Palantir are like the engineers that are sitting there building all the modules in Foundry that the FDEs are stacking. Think of them as the Lego blocks, the FDEs stack in the right order to get to an actual solution that delivers business value. But the FDEs, they might find gaps in the product suite and like critical, like I'll give you an example. BP operationalizes their well operations with Foundry, and they use a product called Foundry Rules. So the purpose of Foundry Rules is BP identified like, hey, we got all these models that are measuring all these various, readings from time series off our wells. that are giving us signals. What if we brought all those signals together and could put them into a rules engine? We could amplify the value of a signal. We could actually figure out a better signal. It's called signal enrichment. They partnered with Palantir to create that product because it was a critical gap in the customer's ability to operationalize data science in their wells. Right? So that's like an example of where the FDEs have given feedback. There's a critical, they distilled the problem fundamentally down to signal enrichment, and they came up with a product that solves signal enrichment. That product was developed in conjunction with BP over a number of years, and now it's a core part of Foundry. That feedback loop in the FDE model is super important. The FDEs don't build the platform. The FDEs operate, they use it in an operational context and provide feedback to the product teams to then improve the platform.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I have a lot of questions, but I don't want to just make this into a platform conversation right now for another time, perhaps.
I think if businesses did that more effectively, I honestly think that businesses shouldn't be in the platform engineering business. So if we separate a technology company, Palantir, that builds platforms from, a company that
what about SAP?
Makes so SAP is interesting. SAP, I would say you have a product that is deeply embedded in so many companies, you just can't think of a world in which it ever gets removed. It's the ultimate advantage and stickiness of a platform. And SAP is so complicated as a platform that you actually have to rely on the SI partners and integrators out there to use it effectively, right? It's not a product that you could just go, in my opinion, I don't think it's a product that the average organization by itself is just going to go and master. Connor, we see this everywhere. SAP is a massive platform at every big four for a reason.
Yeah.
All of the largest institutions that use it can't just use it on their own. So it's it has this massive incumbent advantage. And then if you were to look at Foundry as the alternative, I could build my business on Foundry. I think in theory, if you had the right commitment and technology ecosystem around Foundry, you wouldn't need SAP because there would be a Foundry equivalent of SAP and it would cost 1/1000th of what SAP does, and it could do 10 times more than what SAP does. We just don't have that ecosystem around Foundry as a platform yet. We are getting there, but the leading indicator that this could actually happen is that during SAP migrations to HANA 4 and the cloud-based product, Foundry is often used to operate, to build solutions on top of the SAP data while you're waiting 4 or 5 years for that migration to fail. You can actually build something that delivers value on Foundry, right? And it's because they can integrate that data quickly. They have the FDE model. They get to business value. The data starts flowing through the pipes and the business gets better over a period of months or weeks, not years, And if you can do that with the same underlying data, they're literally just taking SAP's data model and ingesting it into a modeled ontology that is shaped around the business problem. And they do it automatically through a product called HyperAuto, which is an AI-based solution for modeling SAP data. If they can do that, right? Why do you need SAP at the end of the day? Explain it to make it make sense. Well, you need it because 20 years of business history is in there, all of your organization is run on top of that at some level, and you rely on it to some degree for compliance, and being able to close your books at the end of the year. But eventually, I think those things get removed. And as far as technology goes, I couldn't think of a worse technology to run my business on. I would never want to run my business on it.
The parallels, just last closing point is Palantir sounds like NewCo and SAP sounds like LegacyCo, and you're just seeing we're better, but you still take it out. I think this is LegacyCo's advertising pitch. It's going to be this is why we're going to stick around for much longer than most people believe it's so. I don't know whether technology sort of accelerates that rate, which it might, because I think
Intel's still around, but Intel's not the same company it was 10 years ago.
IBM's still around and growing.
Well, IBM, it's growing, it's doing great. I think Oracle's also growing and doing great. I think there's a difference there, though, in terms of what those companies offer. First off, Oracle powers a lot of SAP. Oracle is fundamentally at a different level in the stack.
Right.
IBM is its own cloud, it literally is an infrastructure provider in the US, and that's probably where their business is growing the fastest. It's not the legacy software space. So I would say don't misunderstand the growth in Oracle and IBM and equating that to SAP, because those businesses are growing in different places and for different reasons. SAP is a legacy software provider. That's it, in my opinion. I don't even think it's close. And so just don't misunderstand the growth in Oracle and IBM and why they've stuck. They've reinvented themselves over and over again. And I would say Intel is still, Intel once made memory, and Andy Grove came along and they transitioned, they got in the chips business, and now that business is under threat. And we're going to see if they can pivot and reinvent themselves.
Right.
Every large technology company that is still around today has gone through this reinvention over and over and over again. Microsoft too has done this successfully over and over and over again. SAP has not. SAP has relied on exactly what you're talking about. We're sticky. You can't operate without us. Eventually, they're going to get disrupted. Eventually, it's going to happen. And unless they can reinvent themselves and figure out a better way to SAP, I think it's only a matter of time.
Yeah. Well, I think the first one to be disrupted is the SIs around SAP. Because if you can start to use, and by the way, Palantir and SAP just partnered, I think last week or the week before. If you can start to deliver the migration to S/4HANA and start using Palantir next to SAP much quicker you're delivering value much quicker and you're doing it over a smaller period of time for anything, the migration itself or specific capabilities you want to deliver that might get replaced at some point in the future with a S/4HANA module. Well, the book of business for the SI is what's under threat first. And that's a big part of what's propping up as well, the SAP ecosystem and its stickiness, is that you have massive businesses inside of consulting that do not want it to go away and they want it to last as long as possible. And they'll lobby both for SAP as well as their customers to choose that path over maybe something like Palantir.
And let's imagine that Palantir is the thing putting pressure on the SIs, right? So if the traditional path was build a new SAP module, and that's going to cost $20 million and take 3 years or 2 years, right? And the alternative is take the SAP data into Foundry and build the Foundry equivalent of the new SAP module, and it can write back to SAP and integrate with it. And you can do that in 3 months for $100,000. Like, the choice is very simple for a business, I think, at the end of the day. You're going to argue there's differences in the outcome there because it's not a true SAP module, it's not fully integrated. I don't think there's much differential in the outcome for the business, though, of what the actual business value being delivered is. I don't think the business cares what the mechanism is. So that's for IT strategists to worry about. The architecture is not as beautiful over here. Business doesn't care about that. But that's a perfect example of where a better technology is cannibalizing an incumbent on the business model. They're competing on the margins and the time and the value delivered. And that's where I think Palantir ultimately will cannibalize SAP and eat it whole, or some other business. Well, maybe it's not Palantir, maybe it's Databricks, or maybe it's a product that AWS comes out with later. But you just can't have these companies that are doing things at a cost and a timeline that is just, it's the 1990s. It's 2025, people. We got to be able to move faster than 3 years and $20 million. It's just not viable anymore. So I think this is a good example of where you're starting to see the disruption in the SI space, because that's where Palantir is best positioned to potentially disrupt the business model of these people, because they just have better technology at the end of the day. HyperAuto is incredible. I can ingest SAP data in minutes or hours, and I can build a solution in a few days that's actually production ready. Name me the SI for SAP that can do that.
One, can we tie this in? Usman, you released an article about Accenture at some point recently. Their stock price, dropped 25%? Is that, a signal of AI, not just in the SAP implementation space, but kind of SI companies in general that are, under threat, under siege?
I think you're seeing this. Accenture sort of did the whole collapsing of all the business silos, saying that, to Dorian's point, that we have to move faster, right? We can't have all of these handoffs, which take a lot of time. I don't know whether the move is preemptive to sort of collapse all the silos into one, which makes potential layoffs easier. To say that, we have found synergies now that we have collapsed 5 massive sort of businesses into one. But then the TCSs and the Wipros, which I sort of covered over the last 2 weeks, are showing fatigue as well. Headcount is fairly sort of stagnant, if not decreasing across the board. And there's a lot of pressure Wipro CEOs like, listen, we haven't figured out this AI thing just yet, but we need to apply it to our own business first and get the productivity gains that we do to close this book to bill ratio over here. And I think like the markets they're all down this year, between the 12 to 25%. And I think the market is basically saying like, listen, if you are going to do the headcount to compute rotation, can you do it or not? And please show us in the numbers. And if the revenue continues to contract as they build capability, how forgiving is the market going to be? And perhaps those are the market forces then converge to sort of like pressure the hand into much larger sort of like decisions that need to be made within these things. And then that has a ripple effect across professional services as the go signal to be like, listen, we have to change the way we're working now. And if Palantir continues to grow, and whether you have Databricks or ServiceNow or whatever the other guys are that are saying like, listen, we have these platforms ready to go, you can build on us and get this all done. Like to Dorian's point, whether it's the incumbents are just too sticky. Like, lots of companies just run their entire back offices on these companies. Like you can't just rotate it out and say like suddenly 30,000 customer service staff and support staff are gone, right? Like, I think like that's the gap. And so I don't think that it's near term, but I see it in their earnings pretty much every quarter right now. So I wouldn't want to be leading an SI right now for sure.
Well, James, what do you say from like personnel rotation for SIs?
Yeah, I mean, look, to your point, it's going back to this whole like need to change the operating model at the speed of the disruption is happening is so difficult to achieve. And like when you speak to senior individuals in the more, I'd say, innovative and forward-thinking parts of the organizations, they're just complaining that they're not getting the support and sponsorship that they need to do what they feel that they should be doing. And so I won't name individual firms, but you do see these kind of more forward-thinking individuals, MDs, who are in what were previously the peripheral kind of strategic growth areas of these organizations starting to leave because they're not bought into the overall operating model of the organizations. But it just comes back to this point, right? Like how quickly do you shift a business model of this size from where it is today to where it needs to get to whilst being under siege from businesses like Palantir? As I said, I don't think it's a lack of understanding, and a lot of this restructuring that Usman refers to in Accenture, I think, is speaking to that and trying to find reasons to cut the talent that is no longer necessary. But the ability to move at that speed, as we keep going back to, is not straightforward.
Yeah,
there's no great line here. One of the interesting things I think is the market forces at play. Like, that's incredible because a company the size of Accenture, even if the AI push is just partially responsible for the layoffs. Like, let's just say it was 10% of the 25% they laid off. That's still really impactful, in my opinion. Like the idea, because we're so early in this game, and it really does show that market forces will be the thing that makes the people move. Like that. Sitting around arguing internally about strategy or how we should shift or whatever, that doesn't move the company, but the market does. And what I would love to see, so like one of the things I see in the startup founders that I know, and I know some pretty amazing startup founders, ex-Google, ex-Microsoft, ex-Palantir, they're afraid to say the word services when they talk to investors. Like right. If you say the word services, your valuation, your multiple just tanks, right? Yeah. So like, where do we get to? There needs to be this shift, because I think that as we ran this whole conversation, we're pointing to the fact that like services will be fucking software. Like it's going to happen. But it's not going to happen if we keep assigning valuations to companies that want to get into services and say, well, you're no longer a software company. You can't get the 10x, 20x multiple. You're a 2x. You're a 3x multiple now. Like ultimately, this seems like a great way for forward-thinking VCs to corner the market on a bunch of companies that could be started as a service, have a services arm, and their software could literally feed the services arm. And guess what that does? That gives you more operating capital. Like you could actually start getting paid and making money a lot sooner. But like not if they're afraid to say the word services at every meeting with a VC. I'd be interested to get your guys' takes on, is that changing? Number one, are we seeing multiples go up for software companies that offer services? And B, is there any new, funds that are looking at this and could give those companies the multiples they want?
I think both A16Z, General Catalyst have sort of like raised funds whereby they have been very clear that, first of all, the workaround that they have is that you will start a technology company which aims to solve this problem, customer support, and BPO disruption of concentrics is all right. Let's go, and then. But I raise capital on the technology IP that you are building around, and then you use the capital from their more services arms to sort of like acquire customers, and then you merge that up. And then you mash the two together, hopefully getting the multiples over there. I think if you start on the services part and then try to go back to the technology part, I think like that's where you're probably going to face more of a backlash, even though you could market develop that way. Because I think like fundamentally what the VCs are looking for is that how you deliver the work needs to be fundamentally different. So if a human picks up a call, reads a script, does this, is tracked by time, and now you run it in another way, then I will get you the customers. And if you can one-to-one this, then we're off to the races because the client shouldn't see drop-off in their delivery of service. I think that's a hard deal to pull off because the technology is not there yet. But they're forward betting that that's the way. And that's what I've seen. Both of them, most of their partners have come out and have been pretty explicit about the strategy. And then potentially using debt also in the future to continue to grow these very quickly as a counter to the PE narrative.
I think on the services side as well, like that's ultimately the ambition. I think you're going to, particularly for LegacyCo or like mid-sized businesses, increasingly trying to productize their IP, right? And do acquisitions of product businesses to diversify those revenue streams and have one feeding the other. But I agree with what Usman's saying. Like, I think it certainly will be the sort of technology businesses building services on top of that will come out on top here. I think you'll see an amalgamation of businesses. From the start of time, we've seen services companies becoming technology businesses. And indeed, like a lot of this funding that we're seeing into these pro services platforms is about how quickly can we turn them to technology organizations. But it's a challenge I think quite a few of them face.
I think it's interesting, like services companies, they have a seat at the table at the highest level in a lot of cases, and like they also are plugged into the business. It's really, really like often I would say like the big four, from my experience, they have such an advantage over like a Palantir when it comes to figuring out the challenges that the business faces and the value levers that the business has to pull on. It's just order of magnitude better understanding. And you have decades and decades of experience to draw from. And so, like some people can only develop the skill set necessary to solve a business problem by actually getting reps in the space. I think of like things like pricing and tariffs and things like this, where you just don't have the prerequisite knowledge unless you've been doing it for 10 years to know what the value levers the business has to pull on. So like it really does show that like this services side actually creates a valuable data asset that you can't get as a technology company. There just is no other way to get it. I am interested to see how these companies, like we're founded on the idea we're an open source software company. We build pre-trained agentic workforces. We want to leverage those inside our customers to solve the undifferentiated heavy lifting around, back office functions, et cetera. Go after the cost center. But at the same time, if we were to partner with a company that had, 20 years of insight into a particular industry and how they operate, the next thing you know, we can build like with that data asset, with that knowledge, we can build finely tuned domain specific models that can operate in that space. And they would be completely differentiated from the off-the-shelf GPT-4 grounded in your organization's data. So there's this unique opportunity, I think, to combine the two, where it's like you have a company that's building a unique technology, and you can see where that could be like applied in a traditional services company that has this unique data asset. And then you bring them together, and all of a sudden they can produce a differentiated technology that no one else could make. Like both because the technology company has unique insight in the technology space, and then the services company has like 20 years of history that you just can't get. Like it's a huge moat, like you can't just go and figure that out.
Yeah, it's that access to proprietary data, isn't it? And like,
exactly.
I think the organizations that are going to do particularly well, the 20 years of data is valuable, but it's that constant stream of live data from a multitude of different sources within a given industry, and having that feeding in centrally and leveraging the technology to do that. I think if there are services businesses that can begin to do that readily, or indeed a technology firm that can deploy itself across a given industry, that would be a really compelling proposition. Whether that comes from the services side or the technology side, I don't know. But yeah, they should, shouldn't they? Given the access they have, the distribution they have, the amount of data they have, the larger firms, in theory, should be winning this battle. But I think it's just that issue of their ability to pivot, to innovate. That is the challenge.
Deloitte and Palantir just announced their partnership. I don't know if you read about it. They called it the Deloitte Enterprise Operating or Deloitte Palantir Enterprise Operating System or something, that they're branding this inside Deloitte. But the idea is kind of like this, that they're using Palantir as a technology partner to leverage all of the proprietary data assets that Deloitte has. And I think this was correct me if I'm wrong, Connor, was it in the accounting space they were focusing on this?
Yeah, well, accounting, then I think it's, again, focusing government, just like Accenture announcement was. So, I mean, I think some of that's market-driven forces, right? With Doge cutting contracts, they need to have some type of pivot to something novel. But
we don't know how real that is. Like, it's like press releases, and sometimes it sounds like, oh my God, they figured it out. And it's really like one person inside.
It's not
pitching this idea.
I'll go figure it out though. With Deloitte at least. But that's where some of this disruption definitely comes, right? If you can build domain specific AI capability, and let's hope these big consultancies do that, because they absolutely love to create playbooks, right? Repeatable work. And when I say playbook, I mean like a strategic offering, not a PowerPoint deck. They should be winning, right? But they're not. And I think it's because they fundamentally don't use the right tech. They don't have the right people to be able to deploy things that are actually work. And they think software engineering and all that is kind of like a second class citizenry to the MBAs of the world. And that's why it's all offshored, which again creates a friction to even deliver some of this stuff. But I think that doesn't get it right is going to get it massively.
Big consulting thinks of technology as a commodity. Like, there's no fundamental difference between technologists A and B and C. And that's why most of them, from what I've seen, offshore a lot of this work. So it's like technology is a function we throw over here, and we often will look for cost savings or lowest bidder. Whereas, like, I actually believe it's totally the opposite. Like in technology, it's literally like the one or two people, like OpenAI. Right? How many people are at OpenAI? Very few. When GPT-4 came out, it was even fewer, and they changed the fucking world, dude. Right? Like, one company, all right, with a handful of people did something that no big consultancy will ever repeat, ever. Right? So, like, yes, there's a massive difference between technologist A and technologist B. In fact, in tech, it's the only thing that matters at the end of the day, is the quality of those technologists and people and how they think about problems. So I think big consulting is fundamentally disadvantaged there. But what's interesting is when they partner with Palantir, they can offshore. They can outsource the function of that to someone, a trusted partner. They don't have to figure that out. I would advocate they don't need to. But thinking about this idea of proprietary data assets being key to the value unlock for them if they want to reinvent themselves, in theory, all that access to the boardrooms and those relationships, that is the proprietary data asset at the end of the day.
Yeah.
If they can find a way to capture that, I mean, the simplest form is like we record our meeting transcripts and we capture all of our emails and chat messages. And we actually put that into an ontology and we can search it and leverage it in our day-to-day operations. I'm not saying they're going to put the transcripts of boardroom meetings inside the ontology or whatever, but the actual communication could matter here. Like the actual sort of value unlock of what's in that data stream of all this unstructured data they collect every day could be huge. And like, maybe there is a proprietary data asset that emerges out of one of these massive firms that then reshapes the AI landscape, because now you have a category of models that can only be produced by them. Or if you take accounting, for example, they have access to the books of all these companies. Now, I know you can't use that data directly, but let's do what the NSA did, right? The NSA said, oh, I can't train models on American citizens' data, but if I create a synthetic copy of that data with the same statistical distributions and ensure it's anonymized, I can train models all day. If it worked for the NSA, I'm pretty sure it's going to work for the Big Four. So like that is an area where they could like look at synthetic data generation and anonymization techniques to like build models that would only be available to them. So maybe there is something to this proprietary data.
They need to spin out the audit division out of all of these firms. Like once they do that, it's like tricky and all of that. And you guys have faced it as well. Compliance walls comes up. But if you can get all of that out and then you can keep whatever is left in, then I think like it's definitely possible. And I do think it might get forced into with all of the speed at which technology is moving, because some things the government is going to step in and say, like, listen, like this is not something that you toy around with, and firewall this separately. And then you do it. It's happened before. 2009, we had the spin-outs of consulting out of audit because of certain sort of like events. And I don't see why we may not see it again.
Well, I mean, EY tried, right? And that didn't work out. So you can certainly try. The other thing too is like, depending on the market and where it's going, audit is viewed as a benefit, as it is an annuity essentially. And then it's viewed as a hindrance when the consulting market and services are going gangbusters. So it's interesting, like how quickly the sentiment changes between do you want audit inside your walls versus not. But it's a huge part of these companies' businesses. So, and then least of which is, can you split the company in a real way? Tried and failed with EY, but maybe there's another go at it, particularly if they all try and do it, right? Then it's kind of like...
We saw Harvey AI partnered with Big Four. I don't know if you guys saw that. And the Big Four also has access to a lot of valuable proprietary data for a company like Harvey. Maybe there's a partnership with OpenAI where anonymized versions of the data like NVIDIA just bought Gretel AI, which is a synthetic data company. We know the founders over there. And they can build these models with differential privacy guarantees that could then be leveraged. But let's say NVIDIA goes in using this, technology they now own to create anonymized versions of the audit data, which could then be sold as a data asset to OpenAI to build the next generation of models used in audit. That's something that could actually probably work. And it offloads some of the responsibility here, because what to do with the model is almost disruptive to the business. Like if it was like, what do we do with a model that's really good at finance inside a Big Four accounting firm? Do we charge less hours? Do we charge the same hours, but just keep less people? Like, how does this disrupt our business? But if you open a new revenue stream, even if 3 years down the road, it fundamentally screws your business. But if you're opening a new revenue stream that's in addition to, not in replace of the existing services, that might actually get traction. So if it's literally just like, we're going to partner with OpenAI and charge $1 billion a year for our anonymized audit data, maybe that works. You never know.
Yeah, I mean, the regulatory thing is that I think that at least the conversations whenever I've had with leadership of those firms is there's just quite a lot of risk aversion to sort of consider these options. Attempts have been made, they're not successful. There's been talk for years, as I say, of big tech potentially like buying out one of these consulting arms, which could be the way that you do it, not a separation of the Big Four, but an acquisition of one of these large service lines into big tech and capture the data and put it together that way. Could be a way around as well. I do think so. I do think there will, some point in the next 5 years, and it may be another attempted separation. I think if you look at a lot of the maneuvering within some of the Big Four now, some of the rebranding of different business units, you can kind of see that lining up. And that was the issue before. I don't think there was a lack of consensus amongst the broader partnership within EY to force that change. I think it was a governance issue. The decision sat with a small number of people who had a certain vested interest, and unfortunately the whole thing fell down as a result of it. So yeah, I think the general consensus is that one of those firms will attempt that again, and we'll see what the impact of that is, I guess.
Yeah, it's a very good point around risk.
It is always palpable when you like the risk is so much higher than with some other organization.
And anytime the data too, like in the proposal I was making, that's probably the most risky scenario because the data is leaving the four walls in some form. Yeah, it's anonymized, it's synthetic, is it really? And can you reverse engineer it? And then yeah, the machinery of government regulation around that. And then imagine you did leak something. Like all of the scenarios of how that plays out are not all positive at all.
Yeah,
ultimately, ultimately, I don't think technology is going to be the problem. I think the problem will always be the operating system of these companies. And until that fundamentally changes, the status quo will be there, and all of these ideas will live inside slide decks. But until then, we'll see how it goes.
We need more companies winning in the market with AI, disrupting the incumbents. And I think it's really the customers of the consultancies that should be worried. And I think there are new startups that I've seen being funded in VCs. Like I know one in the space of just making applications to government bids easier. So like there's a bunch of government bids at the city level, the state level, the federal level. And guess what? It's really hard to submit a bid because lots of paperwork. They're leveraging AI to make that process easy, to open up the funnel to more companies that can now do bids, which means you're not getting like one person bidding on a government contract. You could have 100 or 200, and that creates competition in the space. It might be that there's these emerging technologies and companies that get into healthcare logistics that can just fundamentally operate faster and do things better. I ultimately think that this is a bottom-up, market-driven kind of disruption, and that you won't see disruption. You'll see disruption of the consultants once their customers start getting disrupted by the technology. At that point, their customer base is falling apart. And especially if those people disrupting them are like, why do I need consultants, dude? Like, I fundamentally figured out my own solution to these problems, and my people can talk to our board without you and, run the company without you and are willing to take risks without you and willing to do these things. And as a result, we're winning in the market. I think that's probably how it plays out, but that is a really long roadmap. I mean, that could be a 50-year time horizon to see something like that. We may never see it, gentlemen. So
Dorian, be a little more optimistic about getting to super intelligence and accelerating all of this stuff. Yeah. I thought the estimates are like this year, next year. Now we're nearly there.
I'm the one that's always been saying that's all bullshit. Like Connor knows. Like I fundamentally think that because I had really early access to GPT-4. I was part of a testing program where we ran across 20 million Q&A pairs, and that really shaped my early thesis on what these models can do. And not much has really changed since then. Like there are fundamental limitations in the architecture for the models we have today that just aren't going to get beyond a certain set of problems. And like one of which is they're fallible, meaning like you're always going to have a human in the loop in these system designs. They're never going to be good. And like the definition, you'll notice that the goalposts have moved so far on what AGI is, we can't even see them anymore. Like they're way downfield, like they're gone, bro, like out of the stadium, gone. They've now equated artificial or super intelligent general intelligence, what I've heard coming out of people's mouths. It's like, oh, you could do the same kind of work as a human or deliver this amount of, workforce value as opposed to the old definitions, right? So like, I don't know. I've never been a believer in that. I know the limitations of the technology. Where I think it can be useful today, though, is in the cost takeout of high turnover jobs that are often driven by process, and they have a really well-defined set of rules. And you can just take the number of people doing that thing today and reduce it to a much smaller number and take out an immense amount of cost. And those are the areas that I think are really well suited for AI. But that is a large part of a lot of these businesses.
Right.
It's like, I mean, man, in the context of healthcare logistics, that could be 200 million. That could be 300 million, $400 million post of business. So like there's massive potential for startups to come in here and really change the game, I think, in those spaces. But I don't believe in the whole AGI garbage or any of that. I think we have fundamental limitations in these things. What is different today than old software stacks is we now have programmable neural nets that can replace the rigid rules we used to have. I gave you that example of Tesla self-driving in the beginning. Andrew Karpathy just gave a talk on this about when they did that at Tesla. And like this changes how we write software fundamentally. We have this new capability, and it's going to give us the ability to write new systems that instead of having to spend 10 years and use 30, 40 developers working on a system, I can build the same thing and it's better in 3 months with 2 people. And then the next thing is like language are the inputs and outputs. And again, that means like if I can just talk in natural language and there's one interface that drives all of my job functions, like ChatGPT, for example, and it's wrapped in all of the APIs that power Outlook and Teams and Jira and all the systems of record I use. Well, guess what? I don't need to spend all that time building UI. I have one UI to build And I can just leverage language, and it can be imperfect and imprecise, and the models can enrich it if you have like a data platform to provide the appropriate grounding context. And now I'm moving faster as a result. So language has the inputs and outputs, and programmable neural nets replacing rigid logic and control flow will fundamentally reshape the software stacks like we saw at Tesla with full self-driving, and it will lead to differentiated outcomes with less and less people. And it's actually the software industry that's going to get blown up first by this. So like if we look at the thing that's open to disruption the most, it's probably, which is totally ironic if you think about it, like the software engineers are going to be the first replaced, especially at the junior levels. But that what that enables, though, are these other companies that are smart about how they embrace this technology aren't going to look at that as like, oh, I want to go create a new software company to compete with Microsoft. They're going to look at it like, I'm going to go build a factory that makes fertilizer in the Midwest, and we're going to operate at a level that other people can't, because we're not focused necessarily on automating all of the factory stuff. Maybe we're focused on automating all the back office stuff. So like where you have 20 people, I have one, you know, and that labor cost is material. And it's, or maybe they're like, I'm going to go make a new cereal company, or I'm going to go make this new other thing that manufactures in the real world. Or 2/3 of the economy that's services that could be disrupted by this, which I think that's where the vast majority of disruption is. So like, I think the real opportunities here are around like creating new companies that ultimately compete with incumbents in these spaces in areas where AI is well suited. And these two attributes I'm telling you about that fundamentally reshape the software stack drives massive cost takeout and value creation.
Well, thanks, guys. That was an awesome discussion. Today, we covered, obviously, AI's impact on big consulting and big consulting's play into AI. Thank you, James. Thank you, Usman, for your time. Future episodes are coming. More and more guests and partners, customers, content creators, Palantir, other tech companies. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.